When you accept that undocumented immigrants should face the full force of the law, and when you accept that that means violence on a scale that most people couldn't comprehend, it's no surprise that that can quickly turn into extrajudicial killings of white male American citizens. That's exactly the situation we're sitting with in the United States. We've heard about Alex Preddy's killing, obviously, a tragedy. And prior to that, the killing of Renee Good. These situations in Minneapolis only put more, oil to the fire of an extremely volatile, let's say, kind of mass strike, uprising, resistance effort among Minnesotans to defend their neighbors from all types of terrorism on behalf of ICE. And it seems that now Minnesota will finally see ICE agents starting to leave, not in full, but exiting in more and more amounts gradually. And of course, Greg Bovino's dumbass got demoted. So it feels like a win in a certain way for a certain type of person. And I actually am, quite proud of anybody who has taken it upon themselves to resist, especially, being out in the streets in -10-degree weather, offering care to other people who are under assault, who are fearing for their lives, as Alex Preddy did. And that cost him his life. This kind of thing, beyond everything else that you might see on the internet, is what we should be caring about, what we should be rewarding. It reminds us of what the human spirit is and what it's supposed to be. That said, this didn't start with Alex Preddy. It didn't start with Renee Good. And it won't end with them. And the vast majority of ICE-related deaths, let's say, will be underreported or unreported. They will go without notice in even progressive circles, online and offline. And for some people, this is because of a lack of care. For some people, this is because of a focus only on hopping on bandwagons. But I think for the vast majority of people, it's because the coverage isn't there. And there is something very particularly powerful that happens in this country when it's a white man, especially a white man with such a noble background and who was killed doing such visibly, benevolent things. A situation like that forces even NBA players and baseball players to make public comments about the outrage. It brings everybody to the peak of their vocalization. And while this is, again, something that I am encouraged by to a degree, I wish people would also talk about wael Tarabishi of Arlington. In November, we received a report from a young man from North Texas named wael Tarabishi, who has undergone 36 surgeries since he was diagnosed with Pompe disease around the age of 6. He's 30 years old, his muscles have deteriorated, and his bones weakened to the point that he cannot leave his bed. This is from the reporting of Tahira Rahman for NBC. His father, Maher Tarabishi, was his full-time caretaker, and wael cited him as the reason that he wanted to continue living. Maher was detained during a scheduled check-in at the Dallas ICE facility last Tuesday and never came home. Okay? This is a man who came to the US on a Jordanian passport in the 90s. ICE, when asked, accused this 62-year-old Jordanian who has resided in the US since the 90s and who takes care of his disabled son as belonging to a terrorist group. An alien and self-admitted member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, a murderous foreign terrorist organization that has carried out countless terrorist attacks and plane hijackings. This is another fascinating insight into how the Palestinian liberation cause is interconnected with absolutely everything. I don't know if this is beating a dead horse at this point, but to those people who consistently still say the Palestinian cause is not our cause, people who, show support for it are being performative, the focus on it instead of, more pressing issues with our own communities is one of the big problems with progressivism, with fake woke people. All of that, misses the several points of how Palestinian liberation and how the genocide of Palestinians is interconnected with the same issues that kill nurses like Alex Preddy for assisting other human beings. So ICE made this whole shtick, this whole deal about Tarabishi being permitted to remain in the US illegally, how he had an order to be removed from the US by both an immigration judge and the Board of Immigration Appeals. They actually give a shout out to the Obama administration, who unconscionably went as far as to proactively file a joint motion to dismiss the immigration case against Tarabishi on August 10th, 2011. Okay? And this arrest left his son in a very, very desperate situation. He said for all 30 years of his life, his father has been his full-time caregiver. This is a severely disabled person. No one, not even nurses, knows how to care for me like my father does, he said. He makes me feel safe, he said. So this was in November. Now it's January 26th, and the news has come in that wael tarabishi has died. The family of an Arlington man, this is according to the Fort Worth report, detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement last fall, is once again pleading for his release, this time to attend his son's funeral. His son, wael tarabishi, died over the weekend after a month in the ICU at Mansfield Medical Center from complications related to Pompe disease, a rare genetic condition. He had been hospitalized in December for a stomach infection. And as the statement by the Tarabishi family points out, not only is this something that could have perceivably been prevented or cared for better had he been under the watch of his full-time caregiver as he had been for 30 years of life. Knowing how much wael loved his father and how important he was to him, it is unconscionable that he passed without him at least by his side, right? A constant life companion, his beloved father. And so now they're calling for ICE to have humanitarian release. And this is just one of the most tragic and depressing stories I've ever heard from ICE at the very least. It is the kind of tragedy that happens to oppressed peoples throughout the world. Disabled peoples who are not white, people who are associated with the savages, the barbarous third world, are constantly put into this cycle of detainment and violence via institutions. And this type of violence is more often than not normalized and made quiet, to the point that even these oppressed peoples often fight among themselves on social media platforms designed to engender fighting and to engender misinformation campaigns and bullying and outrage cycles. They are made to fight each other because they're not hearing about each other's stories. They're not understanding the kinds of oppression that are palpable, that are devastating, that are life-consuming, that happen to oppressed peoples within the United States and outside of the United States. And that just speaks to how much the problem has been a systemic one and a long-running one, something that existed far beyond the disruptions in Minnesota, far beyond January 2026. Al Jazeera recently published this article. U.S. witnessed many ICE-related deaths in 2026. Here are their stories, okay? This is by Ali Harb. This is actually from today. Ali Harb notes that Pretty and Good are far from the only deaths linked to immigration law enforcement. At least 6 immigrants have died in the custody of ICE agency already in 2026, and a 7th person was fatally shot by an off-duty ICE officer. Last year, it was 32 deaths. Most of these deaths are due to health complications, which is a very clear indication of how interwoven ableism is as a system of oppression. Something that a lot of us don't notice, don't take enough care to identify, don't take enough care to behave in reaction to, if that makes sense. A lot of the times, violence is done by disease. It is done by lack of health care. It is done by disability. The disabilities go untreated or poorly treated, then they are exacerbated, and they repeatedly decrease quality of life because people are denied access to community care. They are left to try to hide continuously, hide who they are, hide from law enforcement. And this leads to death, right? In many cases, it leads to death. And even in the cases where it doesn't, you're talking about serious injury and the types of things that cause, a psychological damage that cannot be understated. ICE also, shoots other people, right? Porter, on New Year's Eve, a 43-year-old man who was shot to death in Los Angeles. Since there is no video of the incident, and since Keith Porter is a black man, it was very easy to paint him as an active shooter, to contest the circumstances of the shooting, to make it seem as though this is just one of those awkward tragedies that we can feel bad about maybe, but we wouldn't want to pedestal the way that we pedestal a videotaped death of a benevolent white man in Alex Pretty. Keith Porter's mother Franciola Armstrong had to bury her child. No charges have been filed in the case. DHS says that Porter tried to shoot at the officer, but what DHS described is that the agent went outside of Porter's apartment complex to investigate sounds of gunshots, encountered Porter, ordered him to drop his weapon, and then the officer apparently fired defensively with the service weapon at the subject to disarm him, to which the subject then fired rounds back. So the account itself sounds quite jumbled, and even in the account of the DHS by the ICE agent, they're describing a poor case of de-escalation and a person who just decided to open and fire at that person to try to disarm them, and somehow expected that not to lead to that person firing back. He confronted Porter with a weapon. He didn't involve local police, and it was ICE that did this, right? In a very similar manner to how local police often carries out these kinds of killings, ICE agents are even less qualified, so to speak, have even less training in these things. But the problem isn't even the training or the qualifications. The problem is that ICE exists as a service of intimidation. ICE exists as a prism through which we all have to live in fear. Not just if we are, citizens on behalf of, our citizenship itself, but just for being people who live in the United States. It is a force that exists to make us live in fear, to make us live without joy, to make us feel every day that we might be in danger, because you don't know where an undercover ICE agent might be. You don't know if a local restaurant a block away is going to get raided. You don't know what's going to happen to your friends and family. And you don't know if when these ICE agents show up, they're going to cause a disturbance that spills over into more and more violence, because that is what they do. They cause the violence by any means necessary. And then once the violence is caused, that justifies their further and further deployment. And so these conversations also about, giving ICE what they want and, making ICE do the wrong thing by not being peaceful, they're a waste of time, because the whole point of the existence of ICE, especially in the capacity with which they are deployed these days, is to cause violent disturbances. It is to cause violence. And if they don't get any type of thing they can construe from you as violent, then they will make something up. They will literally cause confrontation, cause car crashes, so to speak. It wasn't just Keith Porter, though. Gerardo Lunas Campos died in the largest detention facility, Camp East, Montana, in Texas. A medical examiner ruled it as a homicide caused by another person. He was distressed because he was, in line for medication and refused to return to his assigned dorm. Medical staff responded, initiated life-saving measures, and requested emergency medical services. Lunas was pronounced dead by EMS. Rather than even having a conversation about what caused his death and why he was being denied medical care, by all means, that does seem to be what happened, the agency repeatedly highlighted Lunas Campos' criminal record. Again, these kinds of justifications are very obvious, right? As I talked about in a previous video, the evidence doesn't really matter, the logic doesn't really matter. Obviously, it is illogical to kill somebody or to let somebody die by denying them proper care and detaining them in very hostile circumstances. Obviously, that is a bad thing, regardless of whether or not the person may have done bad things in the past. But it is much more easy to construe this world as being one of good versus evil, with evil people having what comes to them, come to them, what they deserve, coming to them. Then the authorities changed their own story, claiming that Lunas Campos tried to kill himself. But an autopsy report found that Lunas Campos was killed by someone. Adam Gonzalez, deputy medical examiner for El Paso County, said it is of his opinion that the cause of death is asphyxia due to neck and torso compression. Guards at the facility choked him to death. Then we have Victor Manuel Diaz. Then we have Paradila, a Cambodian immigrant, because this doesn't just happen to those brown Latinos, those dirty brown Latinos that you guys hate so much. It doesn't just happen to people like Luis Beltran Yanez Cruz, Eber Sanchez Dominguez, Luis Gustavo Núñez Cáceres. These are the kinds of things that happen through ICE, right? That happen when you have a regime of detainment, of detention, and of denial of care. This is what happens when you detain people and force them into labor, as has happened with many detained people in this country through the prison system and through ICE. But this is a big part of what the regime of anti-immigration is around the world. Migration crises are going to be a focal point of our political discourse for a long time, particularly because a lot of people are leaving their countries due to political instability, which you can source back to imperialism that has been caused in their countries by Western powers. They also are fleeing their countries due to climate disasters that can even be something as supposedly innocuous as lack of access to clean water. These are issues that also appear within the United States and are also appearing in great number in the global south, so to speak, in Latin America and parts of Mexico. People leave their homes more and more to find a place to live where they can have more quality of life. Migration is a very natural thing in that way. Just as the birds migrate, humans migrate. They go to the environment that is safe for them, safer than what they had before, more, amenable to their needs and to their desires. And when you have crises that are popping up all over the world due to climate change, which is driven by imperialism, due to instability, political instability, which is caused by imperialism, due to regimes around the world that emphasize political repression, have a lack of stability, all in service of a system that feeds the same small group of global elites, particularly US elites, global north elites, billionaires that collect massive profits by extracting wealth from these countries, extracting resources, by, servicing these countries through monopolies. All of this profit extraction has led to these global crises mounting more and more, especially as profits dry up in one area. Lists naturally turn to more and more inhumane areas through which they can claim that profit, because they're not really concerned about the humanity at all. They're concerned about the profit. These global crises mean that migration will continue to be a pressing issue, and in every far-right movement which is popping up all over the world, that is at the forefront. In Japan, in Germany, in France. I quote a bit from Exhausted of the Earth, a book by Ajay Singh Chaudhry, which I quote many times on this channel, on the Elliot Sang channel, Elliot Sang Again. It is a book that I think everybody should read. From the French National Rally with its own explicit fascist roots, now blending romantic environmentalism and Heideggerian rootedness with more contemporary sounding arguments that borders are the environment's greatest ally, it is through them that we will save the planet, to the Swiss People's Party, currently the largest in the Swiss parliament, arguing if you want to effectively protect the environment in Switzerland, you must fight mass immigration. Green really is the new black. That's the first part of the quote that I'll read, and I think it's really important because when we talk about global climate crises and climate apocalypse, we have been taught for so long to think of it as this divisive issue with which a bunch of people are just denying the truth, and just like in the movie Don't Look Up, it's basically just going to be this extinction event for humanity. But that's not really how it's working, because it is happening right now. It is not some far off event in the future. It's not some event that's going to happen in 2030. This talk of, there's not even going to be humans in 2032. It's all distraction, right? It's all very distractive, very misinformed rhetoric. What's actually happening is more and more migration crises, more and more political crises, cost of living crises, all of which are anchored to, affected by, and contribute to global climate crises. That is what climate change looks like, right? And so if you can expect, as you should, that climate crises are going to continue to get worse and worse gradually over time, as we all adapt over time, then you're going to see more and more justification of agencies like ICE, not just in the United States, but more in Canada, more in parts of Europe, etc., etc., etc. El Salvador is a country that has brought a lot of positive attention to itself from the far right globally, because of how much it has emphasized detention of political dissidents, detention of potential gang members, detention of regular people who simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there's a lot of support for it. Why? Because jailing and detention, incarceration, is going to become more and more popular of a move politically as these climate crises exacerbate, as these migration crises continue to pile up more and more. I'm talking about all of this because, and I don't want to turn this into some sort of video where it's just like, I'm dunking on the liberals again. But I just want to mention that, sometimes people are responding with stuff like this, right, to these ICE crises. Obama, 3 million deportations, no masked raids, no masked agents, no nationwide fear campaign. Trump, less than 1 million deportations, chaos, threats, family separations, fear politics. And this is titled, Deportations Don't Have to Come with Cruelty. But deportations are inherently cruel. The reason that they are construed as deportations, not public safety, when they are purporting to be about public safety, because they're supposed to be about getting dangerous elements out of the country and restoring lawfulness, is because the point is kicking people out of the country. And not just kicking people out, but kicking them around, kicking them into any place that we want to put them, creating more and more loose people, so to speak, loose change of human beings that are stuck in situations that they have no way out, that don't have a way to travel. You know, you hear about this a lot with ICE kidnappings in the United States. People getting picked up, accosted, detained, and then taken out and then dropped off somewhere where they have nothing. And they have nobody, no way to get home. This is the point. Cruelty is the point. Dehumanization is the point. Incarceration is the point. And because we've lived in a society that for so long has said, well, incarceration is fine just as long as you do it to the right people. Well, the mass deportation is fine just as long as you do it to the right people. Because we've lived in a society that has had to think that for so long as a way of coping with the reality that the state has this unbridled power to detain its citizens on behalf of whatever cause that they want to. And that it has a strictly racist element. It has a strictly xenophobic element. It has a strictly misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic element, all in service of continuing profit gathering and continuing to entrench elite power. All this shit is going to lead to more and more Alex Predis. And I don't say this to try to sound arrogant at all. I say this because I think we have to learn as many lessons as we can in this moment, if that makes sense. I think we need to look at this moment as one in which there's a lot to take note of in terms of Minnesotan resistance. There's a lot to take note of in terms of the ways in which people's political opinions are changing, people's feelings are changing. There are even things to be proud of. And that's not something that you necessarily get on the internet. Everybody wants to convince you that everybody's dumb, and the internet will really make you feel that way because you'll constantly be presented with opinions that you don't agree with, that seem inhumane to you oftentimes. But the reality is that people are doing a lot. A lot of people are doing what they can. And that means people are doing a lot. A lot of people are doing what they can to donate to local mutual aid, to unionize, to make their unions more and more anti-imperialist, to stand up against imperialism, or just even in the little ways, right? Being there for your neighbors, checking in with your neighbors, cooking for your neighbors, offering people, to drive to get their groceries, to drop them off when they need to get dropped off somewhere. This kind of community building, which is, fundamental to the it's necessary to human existence, is a key tenet of building more and more organization, which is the kind of thing that will drive political change. It's organization, it's collectivization. But if we still operate from the standpoint like we want some sort of liberal hero to come around and just make the bad guys go away so we can continue to business as usual, we're going to be in for more and more rude surprises. There is no future in which Gavin Newsom not only overturns ICE, but leads to, stops the inhumane, cruel regime of detainment in this country. That is a key part of making this nation state what it is. And the idea that this is something that can just be voted out, the idea that this is something that just comes from misunderstandings, it just comes from bad people with guns instead of good people with guns, bad people in power instead of good people in power, is a misunderstanding of the very systemic problem that will lead us back here time and time again. And so it is really important to take note of the ICE killings that don't get reported. Take note of the ICE killings that seem a little bit more complicated. The ones that end up, in scuffles in prisons where people are losing their minds, so to speak. The ones that happen just because of an unnecessary provocation of violence towards a black man who no one will believe on account of his race, his racialization. These kinds of actions set the foundation for which you can create a declaration of law and order, a declaration of martial law, or the Insurrection Act. They create these environments with which it becomes acceptable to say, I'm sending in the National Guard to support ICE. They create situations in which they can take advantage of your fear and take advantage of your complicity and use it to inflict more and more violence on us. We're not changing the system overnight. We're not getting revolution overnight. There is no world in which tomorrow everybody just picks up a gun and goes to the Capitol and we all make it better again. That's not how revolutions work. It's not how history moves. These things take lots and lots of time, and you gradually see shifts when there's considerable organization over time. And then there are fractures, there are back and forths, there are up and downs. But the reason I say all of this is to remind you of what we're actually looking at, what we're actually dealing with here. We're dealing with a world that was failing us the whole time, and now it can't hide it anymore. We're dealing with a world in which inhumanity was always the rule of the day, And we no longer can pretend to benefit from that. We're seeing a world in which the violence undergirding every single part of society is becoming harder and harder to ignore. And more attempts to ignore them look dumber and dumber. So I ask you to start thinking a little bit differently about borders and migration. Because the next time that you find yourself defending, what is ultimately the inhumane treatment of people that are considered, the more and more you will create space for the existence of a Trump, for the dominance of a Trump in terms of his self-aggrandizing performance of violence. It's not going to work. We got to do better.